Hey, before we get started, I wanted to tell you about a podcast I've been listening to that I can't get enough of. It's called Business Casual. It's a new podcast by Morning Brew. Every week, host Kinsey Grant breaks down the biggest stories in business with the biggest names in business. They're diving into everything from the economics of influencer marketing and the booming fitness industry to the myth that is work-life balance and the ins and outs of M&A. Listen to Business Casual wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Jeremy Kirkland, and this is Blamo, a podcast exploring the world of fashion with the people who shape it. My guest this week is John Reardon, Patek Philippe expert and founder of Collectability. John Reardon shares his personal history, taking us on a journey through visiting watch museums as a kid, living with friars, yes, friars, while interning at Sotheby's, 10 years inside Patek Philippe's family business, and why he decided to take the big jump out on his own. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on. The master of Patek Philippe. You're a bit of lore in the watch world, because I don't think you do too many like forward-facing interviews, huh?
I must have reached a certain age if I'm considered a lore. I've done many written interviews,
right?
But this is, I think it's my first podcast. There we go. It's the first time that you're hearing it now live. Right. Unedited.
Yeah.
What's on my mind?
Yeah. Well, I'm very, very excited that you're on this. I remember I went to an auction preview and had met you, and you were, I was just kind of a chump kid, and you were surrounded by all these extremely important people at the time, and you were showing off, whatever perpetual chronograph calendar or whatever it was at the time. But because just to jump back, you were at
Patek Philippe, originally?
Yeah. Yes. You were at Patek Philippe. So kind of like walk me through some of this stuff, because I know now you're on your own, but you are kind of like the Patek god. Where did this come from?
Well, years before I could even say the words Patek Philippe, it all started in my hometown in Bristol, Connecticut. Okay. I grew up nearby the American Watch and Clock Museum, and literally on a bet, or we'll call it a dare. I was like 12 or 13 years old. My, now he's my brother-in-law, but he was dating my sister at the time. He was a watch collector from the Midwest, and he said, "Oh, John, you gotta check out this museum." And I literally laughed at him. And I remember this phrase I said, "What kind of loser goes to a watch museum?"
Well, wait, how old are you at the time?
I was about 12, 13, my son's age. And those words set me on my life's path. So I went to the American Watch and Clock Museum and befriended Stuart Mitchell, who was the curator at that time. I had a couple of pocket watches I bought at a flea market and wanted to ask questions about them. Then I very, very quickly started becoming fascinated, learning about the technical history, the social history, the aesthetic history, and it all connected and clicked in my mind. Yeah. And just as a teenager, I kept going back. I volunteered. I learned clockmaking at that time, thanks to Stuart, and also from Dana Blackwell, who becomes very, very important part of my life, the late Dana Blackwell. Stuart and Dana, they taught me horology. I learned how technology and art and history connected in a very real way. And I have to say that really helped me through high school and then college and set me on my path, in the sense that whatever I was studying, I always would relate back to watches and clocks. For example, physics class, not the most exciting thing in high school, but I remember connecting the dots of how physics could help solve problems in a very real way if I was working on an escapement or with a pendulum, with a clock, and able to apply what I was learning in a real way from school into my passion, which was at that time clockmaking, and later on some basic watchmaking. So it all clicked at that point in my life, and after that, when I went to college, I amazingly was able to spend a lot of my time doing watch and clock related things. Every Friday, I as an upperclassman, I was working at Speidel. You know those from Providence, Rhode Island, those bracelets, the famous Speidel bracelets. I started to learn about distribution and design from Speidel. Every Tuesday, I was going to the Willard House and Clock Museum in Grafton, Massachusetts. And this is a throwback because this would be 1996. Okay. I'd go into the basement, also learning clockmaking and helping with restoration. I met this young gentleman named Michael Friedman, who you might know.
Yeah.
Michael and I would sit in that basement, and I can't believe, how many years ago is this? Like 23, 24 years ago, and talk about our future and what we hope to do and accomplish in the watch world. And now he is a big shot at AP, living in Geneva. I think he's the head of Complications right now, setting the strategic path for Audemars Piguet, which is incredible. And I've had my own different journey, and I've been so fortunate that just from being a couple kids in a basement, we've been able to turn or in my case, my passion into my livelihood.
Yeah, I would definitely say is probably one of the few people that I've ever had on the show where, that your path, surprisingly, sounds almost linear in the sense that you were really into watches and you were going to museums. This wasn't like, I was in this career and I found a fascination with this and I pursued my passion. That is a lot of history and, to be honest, absorption throughout time to get to that, no pun intended. So when you go to this museum when you're little, what is there? Or when you're 12?
So when I first went there, you're just struck by the sound. This museum is not extremely well attended, and I encourage everyone listening to check it out. Of course, okay. Of course. It's when you walk in, the first thing you hear is the ticking of the clocks, hundreds of clocks, and it's haunting, especially when you're in the museum alone. And many people that work in museums, they say that the clocks and the watches speak to them. Whoa. And it's a little eerie, but it's kind of fun. But in a way, when you're in a space and all you hear is the ticking, it drowns out all other noise because that's all you're listening to, and it does speak to you. And in my mind right now, I'm just hearing the ticking of these hundreds of clocks, and it's just like the roar of a stadium when you walk in, that same feeling that it's just one singular moment that you'll never forget, and that's what it was like when I first went in the museum and met these individuals who took me on and they taught me about a subject matter that at that point I had no interest in whatsoever. Yeah, and I'll always appreciate that. And to this day, if you go to the museum, one of the things I did is I restored a lot of the blinkers, these blinking clocks from the 19th century, where they have the eyes that go back and forth. They're connected to the escapement. They did lions and various animals. Yeah, okay. But this is mid 19th century version of Felix the Cat.
Way earlier, right?
So there's one clock there that to this day you could sponsor a clock at the American Watch and Clock Museum, and I always got a kick out of this Gambrinus clock, the king of beer. And every year you can adopt a clock at the museum. You send them a few $100s, and it's a fundraiser. And I think I hope I paid my check this year, but for the last few years, you go in and it's sponsored by John Reardon, the Gambrinus beer clock, and it's still ticking its eyes, going back and forth to this day. So I my heart is still in that museum, and whenever I go back to Bristol, I stop by, and I do. This is my plug for the museum. Encourage everyone. If you have kids, take them, check it out. They'll kick and scream and they'll complain, but you know what? Something could resonate with them because you never know what life experiences can set you on the path.
Yeah, that's huge. So when you're there, and what's interesting to me too is a lot of this. The first thing you didn't say is like, oh, my dad had a Rolex or my grandfather had a blank. You were getting into watches, but getting more into the engineering and the mechanical side of it. So this wasn't even about like collecting anything. It was about repairing.
I think at first I mean, you go way back. And I think everyone has a story like this. We love taking things apart and the challenge of putting them back together.
I broke a lot of TRs in my day.
When I was, like 7 or 8 years old, I received a Buck Rogers watch. Oh, it was so cool. And I still have the movement to this day that's in pieces. I took it apart, and my goal was to put it back together. And I love this watch. Never put it back together. Never could put it back together. And to this day, I haven't taken the time to do it because, it's kind of a little life story.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to deconstruct in order to reconstruct and move forward. And that little, it's a plastic geared watch reminds me of that every day. So yes, I had that interest in the mechanical engineering, but didn't take it seriously until high school, where I was able to like properly take a clock apart down to every last piece to be able to polish the pivots and do simple gear repairs. And that was fun. And all through high school and through college, I had my own little clock repair business on the side, which to this day, my prior college roommates they were just laughing at me because I'd be like, it might be a party going on and I'd be the kid taking a clock apart. Well, I guess probably
back fixing dad's grandfather.
Yeah, but he's getting hundreds of bucks for it, so he's buying the beer. So that's pretty much how that all went down.
Oh, so you have this business on the side, and I mean that's just hobby stuff. Like, was the goal down the road to grow this business and be a repair shop, or
not at all? This was all just fun and games,
right?
At this point, and then when I was about to graduate from college. Providence College.
Okay.
I received a call from my mentor, Dana Blackwell. And Dana, at that point, he was in his 80s. And anything he told me was the word of God. I listened to him. He was like an adopted grandfather. He had a very amazing background with Lewis Engineering, and earlier that with various watchmaking companies, but was one of the leading horologists in the world at that point, and also close personal friends with Henry Stern, Philippe Stern's father, Henry Stern's grandfather, and they were in business together in the 1970s. So in short, Dana called me one day and said, "You should talk to Daryn Schnipper." And I said, "Who's that?" It's like, she's the head of Sotheby's. I was like, interesting. He told me they sometimes take interns for the summer.
Oh, okay.
So this sounded very interesting to me, and I remember he sent me a letter, handwritten. He had the most beautiful handwriting, and it had Daryn's name, her phone number, and I basically cold called her, and she very kindly set me up after a series of interviews to be an intern. And this was in the summer of 1997. I was planning on going to Africa to be in the Peace Corps, but this phone call...
Big pivot.
It was a huge pivot.
Yeah.
To go to New York and to work with Daryn Schnipper at Sotheby's on York Avenue. And this was like such an unexpected life change for me. But I did it. I signed up for that internship, and I showed up at the first day. I think there was about 99 girls and one boy. I was the only male out of this whole group of interns, because a lot of people send at that point of time too. They send their daughters off to the auction houses and for a future in using art history degrees to be an art specialist. That was kind of the path they were on. I was this geek who's like, I want to play with watches. So I showed up, and it was incredible because it was unpaid and living in New York City without making a penny. It was difficult. And at that point, thanks to Providence College, I was, and this I've never shared publicly before, the Dominican order runs Providence College.
Okay.
And they have a priory in Midtown on the Upper East Side. And the friars welcomed me to stay in the priory.
What?
For a very small amount of money.
Okay.
3 meals a day, plus my own room. And I literally lived, it was a good 6 months while it was my first time at Sotheby's, with the friars. I was the only one not wearing the white robes.
Right.
I would share my meals with them, and what a great group of guys. I mean, they were fun, great sense of humor, highly academic, and I, once again, I'll never forget. Just one day, one of the fathers is a more appropriate way of saying it.
Fine. Yeah.
He's like, check this watch out, and I look at it, and it's an 18K Patek Philippe Calatrava. And he's like, I've had this all my life. Can you tell me about it? And my eyes just popped because I didn't expect a friar would have a
This pays well?
Yeah.
Like, what is this?
You should get a T-shirt that says that. Yeah. So he shows me the watch. He's like, actually, I have two. And I was like, are you kidding? Okay. And I ended up helping, and this is probably the first consignment I ever took for auction in my life. It was from a friar that was sold at Sotheby's. And I remember it was a nice automatic, I can't remember what reference, maybe 2552. It was a beautiful watch. So that, you know what, everything happens for a reason. And these strange turns in life, they all bring us to where we were meant to be. And with watches and what it's the people that I've met thanks to watches, whether it's a friar or it's whether it's worked with a number of amazing people in my career. Yeah. The one thing that's for sure is, you just be honest and true to yourself, and people are going to be honest and true to you. I hope the best from everyone I meet, and life moves on. We have a lot of fun connecting over these little objects that we wear on our wrist.
Right. Holy cow. Okay, so you're interning at Sotheby's, and just so the audience knows, it's very like the watch auction world was what a fraction of a fraction at that time of what it is now.
You could do
right?
10 million globally. It was huge, and that's all sales. Yeah. And now, I mean, like 100 million per auction house is normal today.
Jeez Louise. Okay, and so you enter this world, and like what is it like in terms of kind of helping build this? Because I think a lot of people don't realize this, and I'll publicly say this. You have really, you were the person behind all the other people who really helped create and build what the watch auction world is today. And I think that was one, I mean, obviously you're a very generous and authentic guy, but the fact that, you kind of helped find these things and create, this market in a way that just didn't exist before. So was this where it kind of began?
I think that's very kind, your words, but credit goes to a lot of people.
Behind every leader is a good team, exactly. But you need a vision caster.
I mean, I think like Daryn Schnipper, she started in auction 1979.
Okay.
So at that point in time, going through the 80s, wristwatches at auction were an anomaly. I mean, you might see a couple of them show up. It was just wasn't even considered serious. There was silver sales that would occasionally have some pocket watches, and then there's more important pocket watches, and as the 80s went on, that would sometimes have some wristwatches. But it was a very different market, a different clientele. And for those that helped create this market, such as Osvaldo Patrizzi and Daryn Schnipper at that time, talking about the auction world.
Yeah.
I mean, they were visionaries ahead of their time. And I was just so fortunate, just as things were getting going in the 1990s,
right?
Thanks to the vision of many people of what happened with wristwatches. In particular, the Italians helped create it in the 1990s. And
sidebar and explain that.
Sure.
A lot of times, because I think a lot of people have discussed the significance of the Italians and their culture in making wristwatches popular, but I don't know if anyone's really explained that further. If you would.
I'll do a quick sidebar, but that could be a whole other show. It's the Italian influence on the modern wristwatch market, right? Of vintage collecting, we should say.
Yeah.
No, but in the late 80s, in the early 1990s, there were particular market leaders that just they stormed onto the scene and were the first people to say that these watches are actually worth something. To me, one of the most pivotal auctions was the Art of Patek Philippe sale. Actually, there's two sales from Antiquorum. The first one from 1989 was done very close, I'd almost say partnership with Patek Philippe. And this was Philippe Stern and Osvaldo Patrizzi. I put this sale together of this catalog, which is just so informative. And when you look at the prices things brought, it's comical from today's view. But at that point, they were astronomical price points brought for perpetual chronos, simple chronographs, time onlys. It was the first time that people were really academically on a global stage competing to own some of these timepieces. Now, that was all driven by the consigners, in many cases were Italian, and the buyers, in even more cases, were Italian.
Right.
The Italians had the vision, the understanding, the know-how, and the aesthetic appreciation for wristwatches, and in particular Patek Philippe wristwatches, before anyone else did as a collectible. There were others that you buy one from your retailer and pass it down to the next generation. Yes, that existed, but to look at the wristwatch as art and to start spending art money on a vintage wristwatch, that started in Italy and continues. They continue to be a market leader today with not only the many of the dealers, but with many of the biggest collectors in the world. And I've had the pleasure to get to know Sandro Fratini, who is arguably one of the top 2 or 3 greatest Patek Philippe vintage watch collectors in the world. And he was at the top of the food chain then. He's at the top of the food chain now. And he recently published a book, which I was part of, that came out last year called My Time, in conjunction with Christie's, which shows his collection. And he's the kind of guy, what can I say? He has 2 steel 1518s. I mean, if you have 2, can you imagine? You go through how many 2523 world times he has. It's one after another. His enamel wristwatch, his enamel dial Patek Philippe vintage wristwatches it's just unmatched what he has for 2481. So all those tropical scenes. So this took Italians to push the aesthetic, to push the drive, to push the market, and that all happened in the late 1980s to early 1990s. So going back to like where I come into the play, and I wasn't into it until the late 1990s, and this was already in full swing. Antiquorum was king. Christie's was this a tiny little auction house at that point in terms of watches. Same with Sotheby's; they were very small in terms of watches relative to Antiquorum. They were king in the late 1990s. And that's where I think things get really, really interesting, because the whole auction game, the auction competition that's still very much alive today is another storyline that I think a movie could be written about someday. Yeah. So I didn't create the market by any means. Through my passion and my perseverance, I joined an amazing group of people at the right time in the right place. Right. And I can... Wow, I was thinking about this recently. There was one time I was out on a boat, a sailboat in Long Island, on the boat with Daryn Schnipper, or her husband, Aurel Box, also Livia Russo. Okay. They weren't married at that time. Tim Bourne, I think Jane Puckett was on the boat. She was a cataloger at that time from Sotheby's, and I was there. We were stranded. The motor died. We were trying to get back to shore, and
down the whole industry's gone.
And I was thinking that boat. I just remember the stars. It was so bright, and we were stranded we're probably 100 meters off of shore. I mean, it could have went swimming, but it wasn't going to happen. And all I remember is this, and I say this affectionately. All I remember is this: being on that boat is one sound and one sound only, and that is Aurel talking constantly. He would not stop talking. I don't remember what he was talking about, but just like when you listen to an auction and he could go nonstop for 3 hours and hold court, that's what it was like on that boat. And he was a young guy. He was just getting started out at that time. We were all on the Sotheby's team, all hired by Daryn. And I think that boat literally was kind of the boat into the future. When I think about Tim is heading up now Bonhams with Jonathan Darricott. Daryn is still at Sotheby's, and she's still the queen of her throne. I went on to Christie's and Aurel, of course, what he's done with Phillips and Livia is just another story. It's just incredible to think that boat, going back to, what was this, 20-something years ago, had all of us on it. And that was, I think, I look back at those days affectionately. And it was a different time, but in many cases, the exact same players.
Right. Oh, wow. Geez, that's like a serious murderer's row you guys have on that boat, first off. But like, so what was your day-to-day at that time? Because I think a lot of people don't really have a full understanding of what someone does within that auction world. You know, I think nowadays people think, oh, it's just someone who's answering emails and looking at pictures, you know, but like what, because there was a lot of stuff that you were doing that was more than just finding and authenticating, right?
Oh, at that point of time, wow. It was a different era because this was before computers as we use them now. Yeah. So it's
way before Instagram
ridiculous.
And emails and websites and all that.
So we would get stacks of photographs sent to us and have to write letters back to people. What a concept. And I hated doing that. Oh, we call them NSV letters, no sale value. So someone sends you their $40 Waltham, which they think is worth, $1 million. And you have to write a beautiful letter reflecting the auction house stating your watch is worth close to nothing. So
for every person?
Everyone got a personal letter back because their emails were just not done.
Sure.
So the other thing we'd get is faxes. We'd get faxes all the time. And it was, I remember my first meeting with the fax machine. You're like horrified, like which way do you put, put the letter in? So faxes were part of the business. But the part that was most incredible, and it just continues to this day, is travel. It was a face-to-face business, and so I was starting to travel with some of the specialists to get to meet some of the key players. But all of us now are talking about databases, coming back to in this digital world, blockchain, and how it's coming towards the market. But back then, my job, and I'll tell you, this is the best graduate school ever, is you get scissors, glue stick, old catalogs, and you'd cut and paste each watch outside out the catalog. You'd paste it on this essentially cardboard, and this was Sotheby's database of watches, and it went back decades. So it was my job to help build that database, and every watch you would have the name of the buyer, the name of the seller, the price that the piece brought, and it would be filed. So you'd just go under minute repeating wristwatches, and you'd see every minute repeating wristwatch from all auction houses, by the way. And this was all done by hand. And I, at the time, actually, I can't believe it. Was like, what have I done with my life that I have to sit 60 hours a week and cut and paste with glue sticks? And
like, why, man?
Sometimes
art
actually,
school here.
Rubber cement. You know the smell of rubber cement?
Oh, yeah.
Try inhaling that for 10 hours a day. That explains a lot.
So you're getting real high.
Yeah. So I was really enjoying what I was doing.
Yeah.
And that experience helped not only I learned the names of all of the players, because everyone who's selling and everyone who's buying in the 1990s. I was able to go back and look in the 1980s to see what was happening too. So a lot of these people who have now since become friends from dealers and major collectors, I knew their names before I even knew what they looked like. And that time cutting and pasting was invaluable for me. And I think I'll look back at that as one of the seminal moments of how I understood the market, because you're really studying prices and you didn't know what you're doing at the time, but you're really internalizing the what's out there, what's on the market, what's even at that point, what's recycling and coming back into the market. And most importantly, who's buying and who's selling for how much. And that is pretty much what we all do today.
Wow. So what, like, just for example, like what were some of the things that were selling and what were they going for at the time?
Oh, wow. You could buy a Daytona for $3,000, $4,000. How about a Paul Newman at $10,000? Nobody wanted them. That was considered just pedestrian. I remember we'd put like 7 or 8 of those on a page.
Those watches now are
$250,000 for the Paul Newman easily, plus. But in the world of Patek Philippe, pocket watches were quite strong back then, and which is interesting because they've been pretty stable, if not flat, and only now starting to come back. So I look back at some of the record prices bought for pocket watches at the time. It was quite interesting. Time onlys, certain shaped cases like the Markowski cases with the 990 calibers were bringing big prices in the late 1990s, like the Eiffel Tower, the bananas, all those shaped watches. So those were very strong. But on the high end, you could buy a $24.99 for, depending on what series, for like $150,000, which today has gone up 3, 4, 5 times the value.
The $24.99 is a perpetual
chronograph. Yes. So it was fun because every sale you felt like you're breaking records from before, and over the last couple decades, that seems to be the general trend of where watches are going. And coming back to the Italians, they had the eye and the vision where this market's going. We're still so young compared to other marketplaces. And I really believe that the more information that is shared, that's why education is so important to me. The more that people know, they'll recognize there's so much more value for growth in this as a collecting circle. And the prices that we saw 30 years ago, which seemed laughable, even 5 years ago, seemed laughable compared to today. And I have no doubt 5-10 years from now, we're going to look back at today and see what opportunities there are to buy things, and especially within the world of Patek Philippe.
So, regarding Patek Philippe, when did you start to become more, intertwined in that world? Because I think a lot of people see you as an expert on Patek Philippe over anything. When does that happen?
It really didn't happen until 1999, and it involves my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and a Volkswagen. Sounds like a story, doesn't it? Yeah. So,
well, all right.
So, incredibly, the Time Museum in Rockford, Illinois, which was the world's leading horological museum, deaccessioned in the late 1990s, and Seth Atwood, the late Seth Atwood, put together this amazing collection, which included the Graves Supercomplication, and it was all sold. And due to the Atwood's family's close relationship with Daryn Schnipper, it went to Sotheby's. So I was part of that initial team to go to Rockford, Illinois, and it was a hotel that was horologically themed. I think it was called the Time Inn, if I recall.
Okay.
In the middle of nowhere.
Okay.
I remember we'd go there for weeks at a time because we were cataloging and studying every last piece, preparing it for potential sale. And even the little coffee shop there was the center of the horological world, where everything on the menu was time themed, like coffees with time themed flavors. I can't remember. It was hilarious. It was
wow.
It was just for a watch person. It was the place to be.
Hey folks, I want to take a second to talk to you all about 316 and thank them for supporting the podcast this week. I've been wearing 316 denim for years, and they're the only jeans I'll buy anymore. Made in the USA with custom woven selvage denim from the famous Kuroki mill in Japan, they're a perfect blend of luxury and utility that I find myself always going to. I wear their custom taper fit jean, and it looks good with my tailored stuff to a plain t-shirt. By the way, they also make that plain t-shirt, and they've been featured in the Wall Street Journal for how perfect their t-shirts are. Trust me. Right now, more than ever, you want to support a brand that not only makes good stuff, but cares deeply for others, and I'm constantly inspired by how 316 runs their business and creates their products. From how they interact with their customers to how they take care of their suppliers and employees. Look, some brands do this well, but 316 does it better. By the way, stay tuned as we're working on a little project together that I can't wait to tell you more about soon. Visit 316.com to learn more. That's the number 3, SIXTEEN.com to learn more.
And that's where I first came across the Henry Graves Supercomplication. And at that point, I knew it was special. At that point, I understood what Patek Philippe was, but it was that journey to study obsessively that watch.
That watch for people who don't know?
Oh, sure. So it was built in the late 1920s, commissioned by a New York banker named Henry Graves Jr., delivered in 1933, and it's the most complicated watch in the world up until that time. He paid, I believe it was $15,000 for it at the time in the Great Depression, which was quite a bit of money. You could buy a city block at that point. And this watch is, without a doubt, the Mona Lisa of the watch world and the world of Patek Philippe. It traded for the first time at auction at Sotheby's in 1999, $11 million, which was a number unheard of.
Yeah.
Sold again for $24 million about five years ago. But back to the Volkswagen. Yeah. So it was in the process of researching this watch that, and keep in mind, the internet had really nothing on it at that time, that my girlfriend at the time and I were tasked to find out as much as we could about Henry Graves Jr., who was a mysterious recluse. Would be a very fair way of saying it. There's no information about him at that time. So I didn't even have a car. We lived in the city. So we rented this Volkswagen and literally drove up and down the East Coast looking for information about Henry Graves Jr. We discovered how he was born in Orange, New Jersey, which was quite interesting. How he had this amazing mansion still there up near Tarrytown, New York. And we went library to library in the area, just retracing, finding out everything we could about the Graves family. Now, thanks to one of my favorite watch books, A Grand Complication by Stacy Perman, this story has been told in exceptional detail. But going back 20 years ago, no one knew anything about Graves. So my wife and I, my wife is an academic researcher, and she was able to help me find some really interesting things to help write the cataloging for this the initial sale at auction of the Henry Graves Supercomplication. The estimate was $3 to $5 million, and no one in the world expected that it could bring that kind of money. And that was groundbreaking. Now $11 million seems like just another day at auction. But back then, it changed everything. And on the dawn of Y2K, that kind of set the path where watch auctions were going. And so why Patek Philippe? It began, I truly fell in love with the brand in 1999, and there was no turning back. It represented to me the values of a family-owned business, but also the history is just unsurpassed, I think, in the watch world. Continuous history, and then the watches themselves. I mean, they all speak to me. It could be a damaged enamel pendant watch that you could buy for $2,000, and I still value that for that Patek Philippe on the dial, or it could be a watch that's worth tens of millions, and that's what's so special about the world of Patek Philippe, because across all price points, there's you could have a piece of history, and it's going to be better made and have a better story and better aesthetically and mechanically than its competition.
Yeah, I mean, I know there are a lot of listeners who are Patek collectors, and you know, one of the things that I always try to get people to explain a little bit more is like, you know, which you did a great job of, is like the significance of why that brand above other brands is so special. But, you know, one of the things in terms of like Patek's record keeping was something I'd love for you to expand upon just a little bit, and the fact that, you know, say, you know, with for Rolex, and I'm not poo-pooing any brand, but like, you know, they don't know exactly what dial was on and what case and what bracelet or whatever, but with Patek, that's the opposite, correct?
It's incredible, and I give all the credit to Philippe Stern for having the vision of opening his archive to the world. And when I started working at Patek Philippe, which we could talk about in a moment, I was able to, for the first time, to actually see the archive room where these are all kept. Now, thanks to these major auctions from the late 1980s and the 1990s, it was quite clear that archives needed to be issued for each and every Patek Philippe that was ever made. Because early on, you see letters from the 70s which state the facts as seen from the archives, but there was no formal procedure of how archives should look and how they can be ordered.
Right.
I believe that all started in the early 1990s, if not in 1988, 89, ahead of the auction, going back to it. I think that's when the first archives came out. So by Patek Philippe opening up their history, the fact that they have these meticulous records.
Which was very rare for the watch industry.
The Swiss share nothing.
Yeah.
Information is power, and they like to keep their power. So they for Mr. Stern to have the vision to share this, it just fired on all cylinders, the marketplace. Because all of a sudden, someone that finds their grandfather's watch could have a watchmaker open, look at the movement and case number. They could contact Patek Philippe and then find out when it was born and when it was originally sold. Now, never mind the emotional connection, but the facts that you're able to see. It's like a time-traveling document that this was what happened and what it looked like when it left the factory. That's something that no other brand does in a bigger and better way than Patek Philippe. Other brands have started to do archives.
I know Longines will do stuff like that. Yeah.
Omega is fantastic. Vacheron, for a time, Cartier. But for Patek Philippe to be so sharing, it really just drove the market to heights we never imagined. So for me, that gives me peace of mind, because sometimes I love Rolex, but they make me nervous. It's outside of my wheelhouse, but when I look at a watch and don't know the case, the dial, the movement, were born together, never mind bezel inserts, etc., that makes me just nervous.
Yeah.
That's why I love, you go into the archives, it's a statement of the facts, and then the forensic study of condition is the next step. You're able to, with Patek Philippe, have a very concrete understanding of what you're buying or selling or collecting. And that very much is attractive to my personality, to know facts rather than fiction.
Right. So you eventually start working for them. How did that happen? Because they don't really hire a bunch of people. It's a very small company.
Exactly. I thought it was a joke at first. So this would be, it was after the grave sale. So like late 1999, early 2000, I received a phone call from this mysterious woman. She's like, "John, we'd like to talk to you. We need you to meet at this restaurant at this time. I'm representing my client." I was like, "Okay, who is it?" She's like, "I can't tell you."
Are you serious? Come on.
So I remember being a bit of a jackass because I really thought it was my friends from Bristol pulling a joke. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So I said, "Unless this is Patek Philippe calling, I'm not interested." And she smiled and she's like, "Meet me. You won't be disappointed." Once again, I thought it was a joke, but we went to, of all restaurants, La Grenouille. I was like, all right, if my friends are pulling a joke on me, they're not going someplace that has $30 drinks.
Yeah.
So I went to the bar, met this woman, and she finally opened up and said, "Yes, this is indeed for Patek Philippe." And she's like, I'm doing some initial exploration of potential candidates. Kid you not, it was been at least 8 months. It
8
was
months?
like a CIA interview process. Going back again, it killed me because all I wanted was to work for Patek Philippe. I mean, it was a dream come true.
Yeah. And
they just kept, it was just this long, painful process of meeting person after person after person. And I remember meeting Hank Edelman, president of Henry Stern Watch Agency at that time, and I was just unbelievably impressed. Met Larry Pettinelli, who I was just so impressed with his background and his understanding of the brand. But the person that really just fueled my fire to work for this company was someone by the name of Tania Edwards. Tania was vice president of Patek Philippe at the time and head of marketing. And she understood the DNA of this brand and explained it to me in a way that no one ever did before, of what it truly means to work for a family company. and the understanding that it's not just a job. You're in a way, you're joining a cult. We'll call it that.
Right.
You're everything you leave, every breath. Now I'm starting to quote Sting, but everything you do is about Patek Philippe. And Tania explained that to me, and I remember asking her, she's like, "Are you sure to make this kind of commitment?" And I said yes. And eventually, and finally, I got that job offer and started working for the company. And
what was your role at the time?
So at that point, they didn't have titles. So literally,
wow, big flex there.
My business card, it didn't even say anything. Internally, my job was sales.
Okay.
Now this is what it meant. There's two of us. Kevin Unger and I were responsible for the whole country. We were responsible for balancing inventories, visiting clients. We were responsible for educating at that point, teaching people about the proper way to present Patek Philippe watches. We were the retailer's point person for any problems that could come up or opportunities. And this is before the days of like allocation. I mean, it was a few years into my Patek Philippe career. I realized when people were like fighting to get certain watches and like, begging for pieces. And then it was a lot of fun, but it was a very reactive job, not a proactive job. You're kind of waiting for the retailers to reach out to you, and I had spare time on my hands, and that's when my first book, Patek Philippe in America, came out in 2008. After 3 years of obsessively working on that. It was those years it was almost a decade at Patek Philippe were fantastic. The relationships I made, the people I worked with, but I really missed vintage watches. That was the problem
because you're doing all new stuff.
It's all new stuff,
and also at the time to just interject, like not it was very rare for any Swiss company to acknowledge the vintage market. Like I don't know why that was, but it was, I guess maybe to get people to buy new, but it was very rare and sort of uncommon for any company to let people know that vintage was worth anything or special. That was all the auction world, right?
And I'm going to quote Hank Edelman, president of Patek Philippe at that time, who answered, I think, this in the most brilliant way. When I first started at Patek, I asked him, it's like, so what's Patek's greatest competitor? And he looked me in the eye. He's like, I'll tell you the truth, but you can't share it with anyone. He said, Patek Philippe's greatest competition in the world is vintage Patek Philippe. And I remember laughing at him. I was like, oh, that's kind of cocky.
Yeah.
And you know what? I believe him. Today, I mean, I eat, breathe, and live those words that he said. Because I do believe that all brands today are really struggling with the understanding of if you have this amazing modern AP, and here you have this amazing vintage AP perpetual, prices are getting very competitive and growing in ways none of us expected across all categories, where people are actually deciding whether vintage or modern within brands in a way that's never been done before. So yes, in the past, the brands kind of ignored vintage, and now they're really embracing it and struggling, like how to deal with pre-owned and how to deal with vintage watches in a way that is quite interesting. It's fascinating to see the dance between the two.
Yeah, I think something too that, I just to call out for a lot of people who are entrepreneurs and business folks, there's something about Patek Philippe, Rolex, and some of these companies that, it feels like they operate in secrecy. They probably do, but the business decisions that they make in the long road, like from my perspective, always seem to be the right decisions, no matter what. When you look at what people want to do now, like all these people who are making startups and they want to build a brand that has, like respect and admiration and longevity key and something like that. And that is like their number one goal. And brands like Patek Philippe, that I feel like they've always done the right thing. And I know people are listening to this and are saying, no way, because they blah, 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 blah. But when you look at whether it's certain releases not coming out as often or things being limited or not limited, they've managed to make this company and these watches some of the most desirable objects on the planet.
It's a really good observation. And I think we have to respect companies such as Patek Philippe and Rolex in particular to being so true to who they are.
Yeah.
So they're adverse to change, but they change just enough.
Right.
They're forward looking as much as they're backward looking. They don't exist in time. And it's talk about true luxury. It's because they don't need to. They're both of these companies are doing just fine. But it was sacrifices that I think they both made during the quartz revolution and gambles that both of these brands were able to build the foundation for, I think, the next 100 years. If we're sitting here having a chat in 50 years from now, we're still going to be talking about Patek Philippe and Rolex. I really believe that. And it's because of what these brands do and how they understand what they're good at, what they're not good at, and the fact they don't react. I mean, when's the last time you saw a reactionary move from one of these companies? It's like everybody's asking, like, what's going to happen now with Tiffany and Patek Philippe with this new change in ownership?
That being that Tiffany was purchased by LVMH?
Yes. Yes. And what's going to be the future of Tiffany dials? I mean, this is like so the question on my mind, because everyone asked me.
Yeah, just so you know, I had 10 people when I told them I was going to talk to you, they want me to ask you about that.
Oh, good. We're going to dig into that right now. Because I think we have to look at it historically in order to give at least our armchair quarterback answer. The bottom line is this is the Stearns decision, and we can't even speculate what they're going to do.
Yeah.
But I'll speculate, in my opinion.
Sure.
I shouldn't say we don't speculate and then we do, but they're going to look at tradition. They're going to look at the storyline of their history, of their relationship with Tiffany, and they're not going to react quickly, even though the market is starved that they do something drastic. They're going to sit back and not do anything. And I think that this is what's happening now.
Yeah.
It's probably the smartest thing they can do from my perspective.
Ignorance is bliss, I guess.
Oh, they're not ignorant. They're watching. They know everything. When I say CIA, I'm not embellishing. They know what's going on in the market, but they're not going to react and do something that they might regret later on.
Yeah. And just so listeners understand, Tiffany has always been a premier sort of retailer and distributor of Patek Philippe watches, and a lot of times
since the 1840s. Yeah,
and so you would buy a watch from Tiffany, a Patek Philippe, and it would have Tiffany printed on the dial. And they did it for Rolex at the time, but they still do it for Patek Philippe now, which is and so basically the fact that Tiffany is now owned by a pretty big luxury conglomerate competitor, not independently owned. People are wondering whether or not that Tiffany is going to still sell Patek Philippe watches that have Tiffany printed on the dial.
It's a big question.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, this is keeping them up at night.
Well, yeah, because some people are like, wow, is my watch worth 1,000x, or are they going to make more? Are they going to, yeah, because I had some people like, dude, if you're talking to Reardon, you got to ask him. It's like, all right.
I have no inside information whatsoever, but it is my opinion they're going to make the right decision. And this is ultimately a decision of the family. It won't be decided by numbers. It's not going to be decided by a reactive emotion. It's going to be decided by a respect for history, a respect for the facts, and also an understanding of where this market is going. And I think that timeless understanding of their relationship will help inform the decision that they make in the end. So
yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
I think we're going to all have an answer soon enough, but not too soon.
Jeez. So how long were you at Patek?
Just under 10 years.
Which is like 100 years.
It felt like a lifetime.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, we had so much fun. It was just a different time, a different era. Keeping in mind, historically, the American market is very independent of the rest of the world. A bunch of stubborn Americans, I guess.
Yeah.
Patek Philippe USA was founded, of course, by Henry Stern. He was sent over by his uncle to just really revamp the market and take control of it in the 1930s. And then he passed the baton eventually to Werner Sohn, who's a dear friend, and he led this market through the quartz revolution brilliantly. And up until the 1960s, keep in mind that 50% of every single Patek Philippe was being sold in America.
Wow.
So they had clout, they had power, and whatever they said kind of went. And Geneva would listen. It was more of a partnership. But I think during the time I was there, that all ended. Geneva asserted control. Geneva's in charge. I mean, it's just facts. That transition happened in post 2000. Actually, I would say in the 1990s.
Yeah.
In a way that the statement was made, and Geneva is clearly in charge. And that's why with my book, I stop in 1989 because Patek Philippe in America is the story of Patek Philippe up until 1989. The story after that period is really a global story driven by Geneva. So working there through that transition was interesting because early on we were able to make decisions on our own as the American market. But by 2007, 2008, it was quite clear that they had a centralized command and things were, we knew who was in charge.
Wow.
I think I read an interview or heard it maybe on NPR or something, where 90% of us all have a deep regret in our life. It could be either, most people, it's either romantic or professional. Professionally, I'm one of those people that had that regret, and that really spoke to me because we all have one chance to take a risk, to take a gamble. Mm-hmm. And it's that little pivotal, punctuated moment in our life where we have to make a decision. Am I going to bet on myself, or am I going to keep doing what I'm going to do? And I hope this speaks to everyone listening. And we all have those opportunities in life where it's just the right time. I didn't want to be that person that regretted taking that plunge into the unknown. And I've been talking about it for years, starting my own company. But it was about a year ago today, or a year ago, actually this month, where I made up my mind I was going to do something on my own.
What'd your wife say?
Oh, this was a constant conversation over the years. And I couldn't have done this without her support, without her blessing. And with her backing, I was finally able to say, let's do it. And frankly, because she was just sick of hearing me talking about it.
Yeah, welcome to my world.
Yep, exactly. I think we can all relate.
Are you going to do this or not? Well, okay.
But you're going to pay the consequences and pay the price if it doesn't work out.
You got the health insurance, right? Okay.
You understand, yes. It's all about the nuts and bolts of can you afford to live?
Yeah.
Chasing the dream. And with children, with the family, it's you need to be very careful. And when you have a nice job at an auction house or a brand, and giving up benefits, giving up a salary, giving up everything that you're comfortable with, you've got to be out of your mind. And and thanks, I am so glad I took that leap. And my business now it's 5 months old. I've been independent now for 5 months, and it's been such a roller coaster of highs and lows and opportunities. But you know what? Every day I wake up and I'm happy. And I haven't had that feeling of just complete happiness for many years. And personally, I couldn't be happier. But now when you're professionally and personally happy, you wake up and you're like just ready to tackle the day. And that's where I am with my life right now. And collectability is my brainchild. The whole idea is that I'm trying to use education as a way to bring people into the world of Patek Philippe, because once they see the facts, there's no getting out of it. It's taken me decades to really understand what this brand means and what their watches. They transcend any transactional levels that we're used to in a commodity trading world. And if I could share the stories and share the people and some of the ideas of community behind this, my hope is that more people will transact, more people will discover it, and from the very early months, which I'm still in, of collectability, it's working.
Yeah, because something that's happened over the course of your career and tenure at all the roles that you've had is the watch world has like nuclear exploded beyond anyone's belief and expectation, to where dorks like me are into it, and then you have people who are buying watches as watch funds to trade in, and you know, you just have all these different people from all walks of life getting into this industry. You know, Hodinkee, it would kind of help to launch a lot of things. But also, I think, and one thing I want to, you know, definitely discuss is this is not like just for the richest of the richest of the rich. Like you could still be in this watch world and care about this stuff and start very small and build your way up.
Yeah, within the world of Patek Philippe, you can buy an extraordinary watch for under $5,000. And people they think the cost of entry is $100,000. It's not. And that's kind of the pleasure of it across all price points, that people can be part of it. And that's why my site, it very clearly shows my asking prices. I want it to help, the numbers sometimes help inform the market where people can get in. I also talk about pricing trends, the Nautilus in particular, which has been a hot button issue recently. I also I dig deep into the people, the movers and the shakers in the world of Patek Philippe in a way that you can't if you work for an auction house, and you definitely can't if you work for Patek Philippe. So
right.
I'm completely independent of Patek, and by being so independent, I could say and share what my opinion is. And some people disagree, some people embrace it, and that's what's so much fun, because more and more people are involved than ever before, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
I was just at the Singapore Patek Philippe exhibition a few months back, and I think they had 100,000 people come through. And I don't know if they did age demographics, but I'd say a huge portion of a huge proportion would be under 30 years old.
Oh, wow.
And they were so connected, looking at the museum pieces, at the new watches, and seeing this new generation obsessed. It's just so good for what we all do.
Yeah.
And that's why education is all that matters. We need to teach people to know what they're buying, what quality they're buying, how to buy, how to sell. And in the traditional transactional methods, maybe those weren't so transparent. And hopefully collectability will bring a little more transparency to the world.
Yeah. I mean, I'll kind of call that out a bit, as places that would sell in the past were not always super clear on every single issue with whatever the watch was. You know, not that people were trying to be, you know, tricked, but it was more about moving something. And from what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like you want people to be informed and educated, and the product's going to sell itself. You're the teacher who also has stuff versus a salesman, you know, opening up his coat, right?
That's a fair way of looking at it. Another way is every watch I sell, I don't want to sell. It cracks me up. It's just, I look at each of these pieces as it's part of the storyline, where they came from. I try to know everything about the provenance. And yeah, I'm just keeping it for a short amount of time until it goes on to a future owner, with the hopes that I could buy it back from them someday. So it's almost like a collection. I'm able to collect, but even though I'm not going to keep everything at the end of the day, and the website is public, but I don't have to sell like at auction. You deal with who you're told to deal with. Now I could be a little trickier, and there's some people coming in. They're just, I want to buy for investment. I want to double my money over the next 3 years. All right, I'm not your guy. We're not going to be playing the investment game. I want to sell to collectors who understand, who really know what they're looking at, that we could discuss patina on a dial. We could discuss escapements. I mean, that's much more interesting.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm avoiding the modern commodity market. I'm not interested in flipping 5711s. I mean, that's just not my thing at all. There's plenty of people doing that in the Diamond District and around the world. But there are very few people focused on only vintage Patek Philippe. And I see it, it's $1 billion industry, estimated, just pre-owned in vintage Patek Philippe. That's annual turnover. Now that's huge.
Yeah.
So I always joke, I'm happy at 1%. So.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
But with social media and with other ways, like including this amazing podcast. Thank you so much for hosting me. We're able to get the word out about the gospel we're trying to preach.
Yeah.
And we're able to share things that might not have been shared before in this secretive Swiss world. And I think the more people that understand it will be able to be part of it in a very real and meaningful way.
Yeah. Because, I mean, you travel all over the place speaking, and like you were in the.
I was recently in Dubai, and Kuwait. I did an event with Jasm Zarahi, Patekaholic, in the middle of nowhere in the desert.
Okay,
it was my first outdoor gig. It was fantastic. Yeah. It was partnered with Remy Julia from Christie's. It gave an amazing speech. I gave a talk, and then of course Jasm. The level of commitment to learn, especially from the region in the Middle East, is it's a hunger. I mean, people just want to learn more, and they don't want to buy what everyone else is buying. They want to study and find what they want to buy, and that's the truth of a real collector. I mean, Henry Graves, I bet his buddies thought he was crazy when he was like paying the same money for a city block for a watch. But you know what? He kept that. That was his private pleasure, and he had a collector's heart, and was very knowledgeable about what he was buying. And I think today the next Henry Graves is out there. There's a lot of mini Graves out there, people buying things that they will never sell, and that they just have a complete understanding. And that's the pleasure of what we do.
Yeah, that's huge. Well, so you're so entrenched in this watch world, but like, what are things that you're doing to kind of keep you disconnected and refreshed, so when you jump back in, you're not burnt out?
Oh, wow. I always said you could never work harder than with what I did in the auction world. I mean, I felt like I was working 23 out of 24 hours.
Wow.
It was insanity. And many of your listeners, you're working just as hard, or if not harder. I know. And being self-employed adds another layer of pressure.
Yep.
that you understand completely.
Yep.
That makes you go the extra mile. It's all on you. So what I'm trying to do to survive this new life that I'm living is surround myself with people that I would trust my heart and soul and life with, personally and professionally. And that's why the first person that's on my team officially with Collectability, come back to Tania Edwards, who we discussed earlier, was the former VP at Patek Philippe USA. She's now officially on the Collectability team, and she's been eating, breathing, living Patek Philippe since she started with in the mid 1980s with the brand. So she understands. Now, surrounding myself with people that I could just truly talk to and learn from constantly, should always be people on your team that are better than you.
Yeah.
And that's, even though I only have one person on the team now, there will be more hopefully shortly. I want people that can really challenge me, that we have shared values, so that this company can grow in a way that's healthy, that reflects my passion, my shared passion for Patek Philippe. Because although I'm not affiliated with Patek Philippe, I kind of fantasize that I am. It's like, I really want people to look at, they're like, okay, if I'm going to buy a vintage Patek, I want to go to Collectability. These are people that know what they're talking about. They understand. They have incredible database and access to information. I want people to be able to buy with complete and utter trust. And the only way I could do that is to have people on my team that think the same way philosophically.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you talk to Patek Philippe, like the company, or Philippe Stern when you were getting ready to do this?
The Sterns were informed about what I'm doing, but it's completely independent of them.
Of course.
This is going to sound like a therapy session.
Sure.
But to speak to anyone who's left Patek Philippe, they all feel the same way. You always feel you still work for them.
Really?
That's the cult thing again.
Yeah.
You always feel responsible to the family.
So did you have to get their blessing?
No, but in a way, everything that I do, anything that goes on the website, any way I present myself, I'm going to do in the way that you would expect a Patek Philippe person would.
Right.
And you want to live by those values of the brand. And it's funny for those, I never really articulated this, but for those that I know that used to work for the company, they feel the same way. They might have gone on to work for other companies. They might have gone into different industries, but they always feel that loyalty and kind of the code of the world of Patek Philippe. So yes, I want that to be reflected within Collectability, but on the other hand, we're a completely independent voice giving our opinion on the watches. It's not a statement of fact from Patek Philippe. There's ultimately the archives are the final statement that I see in the Patek Philippe world. And there's some people there that are very knowledgeable that aren't going to publicly make a statement on a dial or publicly make a statement on how many were made.
Right.
But that's, I can, as an independent, give my opinion and informs.
Interesting. That's awesome. John, well, I cannot thank you enough for your time and everything for chatting with me today.
So first, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak openly and share what's on my mind informally. I just encourage everyone to really thank the people that have helped make their careers and their livelihoods what they are today. I mean, so many collectors, so many mentors, so many friends. And I was just talking to Eric Wind yesterday. I mean, he helped inspire me to go out on my own to do what I'm doing today. To take the leap from leaving an auction job is not easy. And I think we should take the time to thank those that challenge us. And hey, life keeps marching forward. It's the decisions that we make today, which are setting the path for tomorrow. It's such a simple thought and idea, but everything that we do matters. And try to help someone else out. Maybe someone will help you.
Wow, that's really beautiful. No, I'm serious. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, good talking to you, John.
Thank you.
Bye. You've been listening to Blamo. Our theme music is by Breakmaster Cylinder. Our editing's by Brendan Finn, and we're produced by Blamo Media. Follow along with us on Instagram at Blamo Podcast, and leave a review for us on your favorite podcast app. If you want even more Blamo, head over to patreon.com/Blamo to join the Blam fam and get access to additional interviews, a community Slack, special events, and more. But best of all, you're supporting the show. Yes, there's a lot of people working on this, and we love your support. We need your support. So try it. It feels good. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.